I'm Skip Williams, president of the Bellingham City Club, and I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting. Without going through my usual comments, I just want to point out that the club is going into our 20th year, and as a result of that time, our membership has grown to well over 400 members. Now, I know, and all 400 of them are not here today, but but I do want to briefly discuss a result of our growth and a problem that we're facing in terms of our luncheon. As the board of directors, we are charged with improving the stewardship of the city club and making this meeting as efficient and comfortable for you as the participants as possible. And one of our challenges that we have been facing in the last year is figuring out how many of you are going to come here every month. And sometimes we get it right on the target, and sometimes we get it a little high, and sometimes we get it low. And so we are trying to make an effort to kind of stabilize that so that the cost for this luncheon stays relatively stable throughout the year. So starting next month, we're going to begin implementing a couple of changes to hopefully make the meeting run as efficiently as possible, particularly coming in to the door, and to stabilize how much we can estimate the number of people that are going to show up every month. Because we do keep an average, but sometimes we miss it and sometimes we don't. And so anyway, so to kind of alleviate that problem, we're going to begin next month a system where you can, either through the phone or the internet, buy a ticket for admission to the meeting, so that we can minimize the logjam at the door, number one, and number two, give us a closer estimate of how many people are going to come. Now, it's not an easy fix, and we've been discussing this for quite some time, but we're going to encourage you all to begin using the brown paper ticket system as I just explained. And then those who walk up to the door and still don't have a reservation, those folks will end up paying a modest amount more for their lunch than the people that go to brown paper tickets. And I'm just going to outline what those modest increases are. So, for some of you going to the brown paper ticket option, the lunch is going to increase to $35. No, to $12. So right now it's $11, I believe, and it's going to go up $1. And we'll be subsidizing that cost partially through the City Club at about 38 cents per ticket. So at the door price for members will be $13. So if you just walk up to the door, it'll be $13 for lunch, as opposed to $12 if you make the reservation. Non-members, brown paper tickets, which is a new service that we will be providing to non-City Club members, your luncheon cost will go up to $17. And if you walk up to the door, it will be $18. So, beg pardon? So, and then the cutoff time for that is 11 p.m. on the Sunday prior to the monthly City Club meeting. What this will do for us is allow us to say to Northwood Hall, this is a number of people that are going to be coming. At least give us a more accurate read. And for Northwood Hall, it will also give them the opportunity to kind of plan better, because if we underestimate the number, we're going to run out of food. I mean, we'll have extra food, sorry. If we overestimate the number, we're going to run out of food, and we're setting up tables and scrambling and everything else, which makes for a not a pleasant experience for you. So, and then if you have the brown paper tickets, all you'll have to do is walk in the door, we check your name off a list, and you're in. Easy. We think this is a good solution for you and for us and for Northwood Hall. But as we progress, we're going to evaluate it to see if it's working and so on and so on. And we welcome your input to all of that through the through our website. So if you don't think it's working well or want to compliment us on it's working really well, let us know. And then, of course, in May at our annual meeting, we're going to kind of evaluate it again to see if it's really, really working well. So, on that note, I'd like to thank you all for being City Club members. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge some of our corporate membership, which is first is Zender Thurston Law Firm. The other companies are Totally Chocolate, the Highland Care Center, Educational Systemics, the Opportunity Council, and I'd like to welcome back to the fold of the City Club sponsorship, Village Books. So let's give those folks So we deeply appreciate all of your support and the support of our corporate members. And I just want to take 30 seconds to make another acknowledgement before I stop. There was a gentleman, at our annual meeting, we introduced the outgoing board members and so on, and there was one person who was on our board who had a family emergency and couldn't be at the meeting. And so I'd like to acknowledge his service to the City Club board and ask him to stand up for just a moment. Rudd Brown. And we have a little token of appreciation to give him, which I will do so later. So, without further delay, I will introduce the moderator of our program today, Dean Wright, who will introduce the panel.
The microphone is on. Okay, the election is over. The ballot count was made final in Washington yesterday. Around the rest of the country, most of the ballots have been counted. There's still a few out there. People have spoken, but what did they really say? And what are the implications of this election for the country, for our region, for the parties, and for legislation that in Olympia and in Washington? We have a very distinguished panel with us today to help us delve into some of those questions, and we'll also make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. I know this group is always full of questions, so we'll make sure that we have plenty of time left for that. But our panel, at the far end, Erin McCallum has spent 24 years successfully raising more than $160 million for a number of high-profile community organizations, both in this region. She's a proven leader in nonprofit and political fundraising. Her projects have been diverse: politics, arts, education, historic preservation, health sector, and the environment. She is the president of Enterprise Washington. And as such, Erin leads an organization that is passionate about connecting business with our state's political leaders to give employees and their CEOs the tools they need to speak for business. So understanding Washington's political landscape is the foundation of her organization's work. Next up, Floyd McKay is Professor Emeritus of Journalism at Western Washington University. He taught for 14 years there before retiring in 2004. He was a journalist in Oregon for nearly 30 years in both print and broadcast. As a news analyst and documentary producer for the King Broadcasting Station in Portland, he was awarded the prestigious DuPont Columbia Broadcast Award. As a print journalist, he was awarded a Nieman Fellowship for a year's study at Harvard. Has a doctorate from the University of Washington, and he currently contributes to the Seattle News website Crosscut. Cathy Allen is the president of the Connections Group. She's spent 25 years working to elect people from all over the world, even in Seattle. She has helped over 650 winning campaigns in the United States and is also an international political consultant, recently helping candidates in the Middle East, Africa, Mexico, and the Balkans. She just recently returned from Libya, where she helped the first women candidates win parliamentary elections in the post-Gaddafi era. In 2010, she broke from traditional Democratic ranks to handle the strategy for Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski in her write-in campaign, a successful write-in campaign, against the Tea Party Republican nominee. And this year she's worked with both Democrats and Republicans, and as I'm sure you know, she appears frequently on public television's KCTS Connects. So let's have a welcome for the panel, and then we'll get underway. I'm going to keep a pretty light touch here, because I'm sure you guys will have much interaction among you. But just to start things off, a year ago, it looked like a big Republican year. The president was faced with low growth, high unemployment. His approval ratings were dropping. Republicans were energized. All the traditional economic indicators and many of the pundits were forecasting a big Republican year, with predictions of a Republican in the White House and a GOP Senate. Instead, the president won by about 4 points, 4 million votes. Democrats gained seats in the Senate. So how did this happen? Why aren't we talking about the incoming Romney administration today?
We're lucky. I think that what we have found out is that, in my opinion, what happened this last year, there are three elements I'll suggest. One, I have never in my life as a political professional seen the acumen with which the Obama team united much of the country's infrastructure when it comes to campaigns. Having visited the big 8-story building in Chicago, where I'm relegated to being, that old woman who just deals with the content of messaging, the fact is that I had a chance to see how they put technology to work. This campaign didn't stop when Obama was elected, and the kind of background they have is daunting to the point of I can't keep up. And I've been in this business for all my life. The fact is I looked at it, and what they've managed to do is to get people who know people to actually engage them to be part of the Obama team. In the game of politics, there's only one thing we have always known, and that is the best way to talk somebody into your persuaded point of view is to talk to them directly one-on-one. Well, now imagine if you translate that to online. And that's what they basically did. They had people who knew people who knew people, where everyone was sort of like asked to dedicate themselves to finding 250 people that they would basically adopt. I think that his machine was second to none in terms of the world and what I've seen. That's number one. Number two, it was indeed another year of boys behaving badly. In all of that, from Todd Aiken to John Koster, it's like, can you put another foot in that mouth? Thank you very much. In terms of all of that. And third, it really was an incredible year for different turnout. Here in Washington State, I'm sure that many of you know, we set new records. Not only was the statewide turnout 82%, many counties, including King County, had 84% turnout. And oh, by the way, 68% of the people under the age of 35 voted. Now, you take that. You take that and you mesh it with what's going on in other places, like the turnout of Hispanic and Latino voters. If you take a look at that in regards to women and the women's turnout, the gender gap there, the nature of who voted really was a cumulative effect that I think ended up in terms of the results we had.
I would add, I think much of what, this thing's not going to work very well. In addition to what Cathy said, which is certainly online, I would say that two or three things as well. First of all, I was mentioning earlier my aha moment. Most of us had an aha moment, I think, during the election in which we saw that it was all over. My aha moment came about a week, maybe even 2 weeks before voting. We were watching the NewsHour, and the NewsHour was going into some of the what we used to call boiler rooms of the candidates, where people were working the computers and working the phones and everything, and they were in Ohio. And they went into this first room, and here was a young African-American woman running the show, and a bunch of people of various ages and various ethnicities and various forms of dress and posters on the wall and everything were working away, obviously very much into the task and everything. Then they went over to the Republican headquarters. It looked like an insurance office. And the guy who was running it looked like he, no offense to insurance people, but he was a middle-aged guy in his late 50s, and he was running the computers, and I thought, there's trouble. And I said to my wife, it's all over. That young black girl's going to have that guy for lunch. And that's exactly what happened. The second point I would make is that you can't do it without better candidates. I've been covering politics since 1964, and I can't recall seeing such a lousy group of candidates on the Republican side during the primaries. With the exception maybe of John Huntsman, who got knocked out about a week into the campaign. These were a bunch of bozos. I mean, they really were. How are you going to create a mass movement of people, particularly independents, with a crowd like that? And the third thing I would say is hubris. The Republicans had it big time because they'd been listening to Fox News. Seriously, when you have your own outlet and you don't have to listen to anything else, you begin to believe what they say. And so that, plus the infusion of millions and millions of dollars, they thought they basically could buy it, and with the big bucks, convince the people who were less informed, perhaps, and buy it. And it was a massive case of hubris, I think, on the Republican part, on the part of the Republicans.
Yeah, just ask Carl Rove. So I'm going to compliment, and then I'm also going to spice it up a bit, just for you cannot hear me? For entertainment purposes. How's that? Okay, so theme one, it's the culture, stupid. So what that means is the Democrats they understood that. We have become a society of adolescents who pay attention to this stuff immediately the day after Election Day. And the Republicans keep missing that boat. President Obama, when he ran in 2008, developed that infrastructure apparatus that Cathy talked about, and then expanded and learned from it. And to Floyd's credit, the insurance agent is right on point. Those phone banks and those operations within the GOP apparatus are pretty technology unsophisticated, to say the least. So that is a big misstep and something that the Republicans have to learn from. Secondly, labor to neighbor, boots on the ground, field work, grassroots, however you say that, politics has become a retail endeavor. It is all about customer service, all about marketing and branding. And to my point of it's a culture, stupid, you can't begin to build that brand 6 months, not to mention 6 weeks before the campaign. Romney, actually, he had stronger voter turnout than McCain did. But what the Democrats did very, very strategically at a state-by-state level, community, legislative district assembly, is they also drove issues. In Washington state, we had 2 initiatives, same-sex marriage and the legalization of pot, that drove, again, a lot of the youth vote out to benefit the partisans.
Thanks, Floyd. You touched on the subject of money. Let's talk a little bit more about that. More than $6 billion was spent by candidates and super PACs in this election. Did it really make a difference?
Well, as it turned out, it didn't make as much difference as they thought it would make. But yes, I think for the first time since I've been watching politics closely, I think we were in real danger of elections being bought. Not only the presidency, but some of the races for Congress and the Senate. I don't think it happened. But you know, obviously money makes a big difference. It made a big difference right here in Whatcom County in the congressional race for the 1st District congressional seat. The Republicans blew that big time. They had a race they could have won, and they did not support a candidate who had enormous name familiarity in the district, running in an open and divided seat, and as a result, they lost that one. But everyone blames Citizens United for this purge of money, but they sometimes forget that the Federal Elections Commission could do a fair amount about this, except that it is broken. It is broken on a split Democratic-Republican membership that hasn't found a way to work together, and as a result, some of the policing of elections is not taking place. The idea of people sitting in line and waiting to vote for hours and hours and hours, we're not used to that in this part of the world. But it's outrageous. There's no excuse for it. It's a third world system. And yet the feds can't do too much about it because states run elections. So yes, it's money, and we have got to get a handle on the money. The money is going to buy an election sooner or later when they've got a better candidate. But it's going to buy it someplace, and that's not what we want.
I wanted to share some of the numbers, how it relates to Washington State, because I do believe the money, for the amount of growth that we saw in money, and I'm sure all of us probably believe it is way over the top. This is not where our founding fathers of this nation ever believed it would go. So in 2000 and this past cycle, 2012, $30.585 million was spent in independent spending in Washington state elections alone. Now, granted that most of it spent in the governor's race, both in support of Governor-elect Inslee and Attorney General Rob McKenna. Compare $30.585 million. 2010, it was $4.5 million. 2008, $23.9 million. Difference between 2008, 2012 is the presidential year. There is an enormous amount on all sides of outside money coming into this state, and for that matter, other states. So think about this. This is our community, our state, And when I speak to groups, a lot of people will say, well, what can we do to stop that? And I say, it's up to each and every one of us. You cannot expect elected officials, Democrats or Republicans, to stop this because they are the ones that are benefiting from it, unfortunately.
The average contributions that women gave to campaigns in 2010 was 27%, which is 27% of the contributions to federal elections were actually 27%. This last year, women gave 44% of the total number of dollars for Obama and 34% for Romney. Not since Patty Murray's first Senate campaign, was the first campaign where more than 50% of the high donors were women. And so from that perspective, what we are seeing is a dramatic increase in the number of women who are indeed contributing. In terms of taking a look at this, would you assume that the average woman contribution for independent expenditures is the same? Do you think that there were a number of women who were indeed funding those independent expenditures?
No.
We don't know. That's a trick question. Nobody knows what that independent expenditure money is all about. But the fact is it's fair to say 3/4 of that money is not necessarily coming from the housewives of America. What I can tell you is that what we have seen is there's been a dramatic difference in that money. Frankly, the money that was best spent was not necessarily that independent. And I will go so far, Floyd, as to say this is the first year of my professional career where money did not mean you won or lost, with the possible exception of Delbene. Possible exception there, except, Koster just didn't help himself, with all that. What I got to tell you is that in this real world order, the precious money that Obama had that made all the difference was not on TV. It was the people he employed to build the lists of those databases and those computers in Chicago for the last 4 years. There was approximately 1,100 full-time employees that never lost business once the old man was in office. That became, and by the way, several great Washingtonians are in that mix of those people who really are creating the science of tomorrow's persuasion, which is all online. And finally, what I also want to say in regards to the money, we did see some different things happening this year, and that is the absolute increase in the number of people who are giving. We have now far more people who are giving. The problem is that the people who are giving a lot are giving a lot more. Yeah. The fact is we had over 1/3 more people who contributed in this election than we did in the last presidential election. And the average contributor under the age of 35 gave an average of 4 times, and the average they gave was less than $100. So it is a difference in terms of the nature of the democracy of the beast. Thanks.
Let's talk some more.
One of the things that is of great interest in the state of Washington is that Patty Murray is now the superstar of the Democratic Party. No one, absolutely no one, expected that the Democrats would pick up seats in the Senate in this election. And a great deal of the credit for that goes to Senator Murray.
Hey, now, Floyd, wait a minute. Why was that? What was the brilliance in Patty's strategy that caused that increase?
I'm not sure I know, but I know that she recruited superior women candidates in particular. Seriously, the Senate is going to be a very different place. I think the change in the Senate, it's not only that the Democrats picked up 2 seats, but the quality of the new senators coming in and the others leaving or defeated is, I think, a quantum leap. It will be a very, very different Senate.
Let's talk a little bit more about women then.
Oh, okay.
So the new Senate is going to have 20 women, which is an all-time high. Not quite parity, but it's getting up there. The Washington delegation in the Senate and House is going to be 1/3 women this year, I believe.
5 out of 12. That's 40%.
5 out of 12. There's my math. So, was this a year of the woman in politics?
I would say yes. Yes, yes, yes. And my dear friend Cathy and I have been part of a Project 2012, which is a nonpartisan national entity that tries to get women to run, because if they run, they win. From a partisan breakout, roughly, you know, the state legislature, between the House and Senate, about 60 of the female breakout, about 60% or so are Democrats, and about a third, 30%, 33% are Republicans. I look at, and I know for the men in the room, you hate to talk about the gender card, but I do think it is really exciting to see women stepping up for public service, just like they step up in serving their community in volunteer ways through nonprofit leadership and organizations. Public service is just that important. It's not career politicians, but it is public service. And I do think women have a character and a charisma where they accept other people's opinions a little bit more openly, and they are willing to compromise to meet the end goal and to get solutions, because that's what we do as busy moms who are juggling careers and all of that. So.
Well, I would agree totally that it was the year of the women, and I'm hoping maybe we'll have a few less wars maybe as a result of it. No, I'm serious about that. I think it will make a difference in the way the Senate operates. I remember in many years of covering a state legislature that about in the late 1960s, early 1970s, there was a huge breakthrough in Oregon where I was working in the number and quality of women winning legislative seats. And it did make a difference in the quality of the output of the legislature. So I see no reason why that won't happen here. The interesting thing in Washington State is it is not entirely Democratic women in the Congress. We have two Republican women in the House, one of whom is in a leadership position. So we're really pretty well represented in both caucuses.
Actually, both of them are in leadership now. I just found out that Herrera got named in there too. I can tell you this was the year of the woman in many ways. In fact, what you should know, what predicates the year of the woman, or what did in 1992, was that it was the year after redistricting. It was a presidential year turnout, which brings a whole lot more people out, and you always have boys behaving badly in years when there's a year of the woman. And in 1992, we remember the Anita Hill situation with all those bad white boys sitting up there telling Anita Hill what she could and could not say. In this year, we just had 4 to 6 of these guys who had decided they were going to make choice an issue that we could hit out of the park in so many ways. What I can say is that know that what happened in Congress this year is we went from 86 women in the United States Congress to now 98. We are on the verge at 98. The fact is that not only did that happen because we got together, I should tell you that oftentimes Erin is usually as far to the right as I might be to the left. This is a year when we found common ground, deciding that we could work together in finding great women, Republicans and Democrats. I should let you know I actually worked for 3 Republican candidates, and I also worked for 4, or contributed to 4, Republican women. And I challenge you, if you want to do more to be able to change the dynamics of politics in the cesspool it's in right now, you who are good Democrats need to support a Republican. And you Republicans need to support a Democrat. It's what Erin and I promised each other. And that which we are doing right now is second to none in terms of what we were able to accomplish. The people we just sent down to Olympia are among the most, I think, broad-minded from the perspective of being able to look beyond party lines. The party system, if you'll accept my apology, has been absolutely it's been ground to a halt, but it's also become a politics of winning and losing and not getting work done. And as women who understand that, as guys who understand that, It is better, and one of the reasons Erin and I decided to come up today was because, you know, Whatcom County, you do get it. Whatcom County has been ahead of its time when it comes to telling my party and her party, get out of here, you're crazy. The fact is you choose the people who are good and you don't necessarily choose parties. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say it was my pleasure this year to have worked with some of the most fabulous women who became the first women on their benches. In terms of the Superior Court benches of Washington State, of the 39 different districts, what you should know is that 31 of them have never had a woman on that Superior Court bench. You can imagine how appalled I was to find that out, that one of them was Whatcom County. I mean, what was that about? Floyd? And so what happens, of course, I'm pleased with my good friend Karen, who was actually helpful in the campaign, to have worked on Deborah Garrett's campaign, because right now we have of those, we now have only 26 benches, Superior Court benches in Washington State, that have no women on them. So this was a great year for women all around.
Well, while we're talking about common ground, do you think much of that will be found in Olympia this year?
I'm optimistic. I really am. I grew up over in central Washington, and I remember the days of the Dixie Lee Rays and the Dan Evans and the Joel Pritchards, where we had collaboration between Democrats and Republicans, moderate Republicans, fiscal conservative or respectful Democrats. And we know historically, both from a business community perspective, as well as a nonprofit sector, and even from a public sector, Washington works well when you can govern from the middle. We are a typical prototype of a Washington state voter is fiscally conservative, or we're basically tightwads, but we're very, very socially progressive. We want to give a hand out, a hand up, to get everyone on a level playing field. With the state Senate right now at 26-23, Democrats are still the majority party. Republicans are close behind. But I think what you will see beyond those labels is you will see a group of pragmatic citizen legislators who are more interested, and again, this is optimism speaking, who are more interested in getting to deal with the real challenges that we have as a state in terms of education, not to mention getting a sustainable budget, because we are already entering into, I think it's just under $1 billion. We have a deficit, dealing with our transportation challenges, and then also just streamlining a lot of the regulations that choke a lot of our small businesses. On the House side, Democrats still have a pretty clear majority, but the House did pick up 2 Republicans. What's encouraging is 31 freshmen, I believe, are coming, and these are men and women who, for a good majority, are not uber partisan. They are there for the right reason, public service. And I would ask all of you, and I know you have incumbent legislators in the 42nd and in the 44th returning, but they can only do their job if you talk to them. You are partners with them. They need you as much as you need them. We are definitely in for a dynamic legislative session with some big issues that clearly have to be struck well with Democrats and Republicans at the table.
I won't have much to say on the legislature because I'm just not as close to it as my colleagues are. I would say one thing that I have seen in action in the time I covered the Oregon legislature, coalition control of the Oregon Senate, and we don't want it. It's all about power for half a dozen people who put it together, and I hope that we can avoid that here. Maybe we can all get together and reason and be very mellow about it all now that we've passed the marijuana law. Perhaps some of our legislators will not be quite as combative, but we'll we'll see on that one.
I would have to say that I am not necessarily as optimistic right now. We have a governor that is brand new, still looking to see who's that cabinet of his going to be. He's got a $1 billion deficit. He's got a Senate that's hanging on by dear life in terms of that 26, 23, and I even heard today that it was falling apart. The fact is that the House stays strong, but that strong only is defined by Frank Chop, the Speaker of the House. I don't think that it is yet that the workhorse that it needs to be to get us into a place where we're better funding education, we're not turning our backs on higher ed, and frankly, we have a budget under control. These are pretty big steps. My feeling is that this may be a good year for a skirmish. It's not going to be the year we solve the battle.
Only one Republican was elected to statewide office in Washington this year. The president won by 14, 15 points. Is this a sign that Washington is becoming more deeply blue, or is that not the case?
Well, I think that these races don't necessarily run in tandem. No one believed that Obama would have coattails this year. It proved that perhaps that he did have coattails, but the coattails were in the ground game, getting voters to the polls. I think it largely depends upon the ability of Republicans to put up strong candidates. But it's really tough in this state. McKenna was probably the best qualified Republican to run for governor in this state in the last 25, 30 years. And in the long run, he was beaten rather handily in the final counting. So, where do they go? The problem with not having other statewide elected offices is that there's no bench. There's no bench to run for governor. There's no bench to run for the U.S. Senate, other than perhaps the members of the House. But they're often not terribly well known outside their own House district. So the Republicans have got to figure some way to get someone else to that level of statewide recognition that Rob McKenna had, or they have a very poor shot at taking over the governorship in 4 years. And I don't think you can do that in this state from the Secretary of State's office. In Oregon, that's the position of the candidate in waiting as Secretary of State. In this state, it seems to be Attorney General, and here again, we've got a Democrat in that seat. So, I think we're going to be blue for a very long time, along with California and Oregon, the left coast, so to speak. And I don't see any reason to change. One of the reasons is environmental interest in the West. We are a pretty green state, and we want to be a green state. And quite simply, the Republicans, by and large, have turned their back on the green movement and have instead selected the mantra "jobs, jobs, jobs, and jobs." As the economy improves and unemployment goes down, it's 6.4 right now in Whatcom County. That mantra of jobs, jobs, jobs is going to be less of a factor in getting candidates elected, and it would make it more difficult for Republicans to gain the margin if the state and the region continues to be very green.
Let me just ask follow up on this. What implications do you think the election will have, if any, on a subject that is very close to the hearts of many people in this room, the proposed coal port?
You did put me on the panel for a reason, didn't you? Yeah. Now we know what it is. I don't know is the answer. Inslee clearly is more likely to be opposed to the coal export than Rob McKenna would have been, although McKenna danced around the issue, as did Inslee in the election. And the reason for that is Inslee's reputation in the U.S. Congress when he was there was Mr. Solar, Mr. Green, etc. He even wrote a book about solar energy. So he is very, very big on global warming. A very strong opponent of putting more coal-burned power plants on the face of the planet. So one would expect him to be more critical, perhaps in appointments he makes to areas in state government that are involved in this, perhaps in speaking out for an area-wide assessment, which Gregoire has neglected to do, or chosen not to do, rather, whereas Kitzhaber in Oregon is pushing for it. So I think the Inslee election probably is the major thing that could possibly affect that. I don't see any of the other elections. I don't know where Obama's going on this. The federal government is giving away coal in the Powder River Basin under his administration. I don't know whether that will change or not.
Well, when it comes to that coal train, I think that train has left the station and it's not coming to Bellingham. I'll tell you that. I got to say that in looking at this, with taking a look at what's going on with, again, this is one of those situations where the facts matter not. It is a situation where the politics has trumped the actual facts, very similar to the work we were doing in Alaska regarding the Pebble Mine. Once it gets to a point of critical mass where you have people up and down this coast saying, no, thank you. And by the way, your point about, what's really happened is that jobs is no longer the pressure point. We passed that about 4 weeks before the election. Jobs in the economy was not the number one issue in Washington state. The number one issue was education. And it was, we had cut too far, we Democrats cut too far. More Republicans won because they were perceived as the heroes and heroines of education funding and not so much cuts, including Rob McKenna, who actually came out as more of the education-minded gubernatorial candidate. What I think is that I'm looking at following the money in this case. When it comes to Inslee, 2 pockets of money speak louder than any other, and that is the Washington Education Association. They decided early on they were not going to fight the charter school initiative, and frankly, it shows. They got the one most important thing to their paychecks, and that is literally and substantively the governor. The second really has to do with the League of Conservation Voters. It's the first time the League of Conservation Voters nationally has endorsed, supported, and paid for independent work to be done for a gubernatorial candidate. With that in mind, those two play very highly in terms of what I think you're going to see the appointments as well as the direction of Inslee. And I just don't think that little bit of an edge that the coal the train got because Gregoire was not necessarily going to be standing in its way. The fact is that Jay Inslee, I believe, will stand in its way.
Erin touched on the marijuana and gay marriage initiatives as being a factor in bringing out young voters. As you know, 3 states approved gay marriage, and a 4th voted down a constitutional amendment to prohibit it, and 2 states voted in favor of legalizing marijuana. What do you think these social issue ballot questions have to say about the shape of the coming electorate, the shape of coming elections? Gay marriage was a wedge issue barely 4 years ago, and this year it became an issue that Obama really embraced, perhaps somewhat reluctantly, but once he did, he was all in for it. What does that have to say about the changing nature of the electorate?
The electorate is younger. The electorate is more compassionate, more open-minded. They're also, putting on my economic hat, they're also a little naive, perhaps, in terms of really understanding balance, checks and balances. And I think we are in this state, and I'm sure you have read a number of op-eds about this, but we really are at a point where we are kind of on a slippery slope with one political party continuing to dominate. I do agree with Floyd. We are a leaning blue state. We've always been a leaning blue state. The Republican Party, however, has, in my personal opinion, ignored or has failed to ignore that to be a Republican and to be elected in Washington state, particularly in Western Washington, you have to be a moderate. And they continually tend to be going more to the right. That's why our organization is so committed to really finding balanced legislators, individuals to run for public office who fit the demographics of the region, and whether they're D or R, that's second nature.
It's notable that the marijuana measure ran quite a little bit more strongly than did the gay marriage issue, and my theory is that people have had more experience with marijuana.
Speaking as a Pacific Northwest person.
Yes. The I would definitely go with Erin on this and say that the makeup of the electorate had an awful lot to do about those particularly, well, both of them, I think. Young people, this is simply not an issue with them. And young people of both parties, with the exception of maybe of young evangelicals, these are not big issues for them. They say, well, you know, so what? I know people, a lot of people who are gay. They're friends of mine. I know people who smoke pot, occasionally use it myself. So, you know what? Why is this a big issue? Why are we even voting? So if you get a demographic turnout like we got this year, I think the wind really blows in that direction. You wouldn't maybe have passed it in 2010.
Right.
Floyd, as your new political consultant, I can't advise you say those things in front of a camera. It's not a smart thing, Floyd. This is going to be on TV, Floyd. So what I can say is that there were things that I think contributed to the kind of partisan divide that has definitely gotten worse. In times of recession, we're going back and taking a look at exactly the history of recession and what it does to partisanship. In partisan times like these, what happens when they have less money, it's she or he who rules the roost gets the money and puts it in their projects. Everybody else be damned. The important part here, we're now seeing that the public is ahead of that now. You and many other people in the public have now decided more work, less partisanship is the way we want to go. Now, when it comes to my generation and many of your generations, we're all going to say, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm going to vote for every Democrat anyways. The important part is that when it comes to people who are 35 and under, oh no. In fact, Erin and I we worked together on focus groups with young people. And know what they said? We could care less about political parties. Yeah. Most of them said, I refuse to vote all one party. And frankly, 7 different county auditors have now reported, indeed, that is the case. They've never had a year where people were bouncing back and forth quite as much. And indeed, those young voters are the ones that say, I'm not buying any one party line. And what we know in terms of course, is the state more blue? Well, you know what? Never underestimate my party's ability to blow it. And so it's from that point of view. We all know this. We all know, we watch what happens after an election where the Republicans are now sitting down and actually contemplating what has to change. We're still drinking bad champagne. The fact is that this is now what has to happen, is we have to take a look at the realities. These people under the age of 35, the most affluent, well-traveled, healthiest, most environmentally conscious, multitaskers, tech savvy, and oh, by the way, people who appreciate the global sense of where we live. If there is anything that's going to dictate the political directions, it's going to be a population that's not here, but one that's coming and in a way is going to refuse the definition of partisanship that we've let evolve, in my opinion.
Okay, I think it's time to open up the floor for questions. There are microphones in all neighborhoods here. Let's start back here.
I want to come back to the influence of money in the recent election, the influence of Citizens United. I think a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum concluded and wanted to say that, see, it didn't change the results. Obama still won. The Democrats kept the Senate, won a couple more seats. and see it wasn't such a great evil. I don't agree with that. I think Citizens United, which was mostly right-wing money, had an enormous influence on the election. Without all of the billions of dollars that came in through Citizens United, I think we would have had a far greater mandate for Obama. We would have had even more Democratic senators, and the Republicans, towards the last month of the election, this was reported in all the major media, moved a lot of their money into House races. And they kept the House that way. And I think
okay,
we
really need a
mistake
question from you.
underestimating. What do you think about it?
Well, what I think is that there was so much money in effect that at the end of it, some of these super committees didn't know where to spend their money. Yeah. And as a result, I think it worked into a backlash. There was so much money being spent in the swing states in particular. We didn't see any of it here. That I think people, we saw some of it, but not the big stuff.
In the AG's race.
In the AG's race, okay. There was so much money being spent that the image, I think a lot of people in those swing states wound up with was, if you can make a little a metaphor here, imagine they were looking at and they were imagining a Mount Rushmore, and on the Rushmore faces were Mitt Romney, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and Karl Rove. And then over to the side, erupting like a volcano, was Donald Trump. The money was so big and so outrageous that I actually think it cost them votes. Now that's a problem, because people are going to have a tendency to roll this under the rug for another 2 or 4 years because it maybe didn't make a difference in the election. But as I said earlier, it will sooner or later unless we fix it. We've got to fix it, starting with the transparency issue, and then we've got to deal with it in other ways too.
One other comment on that. Washington State did see some of this money. It's just a little bit more cleverly hidden because the money comes from, on the Republican side, Republican Governors Association, on the Democrat Governors Association. To the credit of organized labor and the timing comment that Floyd mentioned, I think the Democrats and organized labor, because they are so sophisticated in the ground game, they spread those dollars out over a longer period of time. Whereas Republicans all of a sudden turn to their clock and say, it's election time, let's go spend money. So it becomes much easier to be like, here's the big nugget, but if you pull the sheets behind this, you can see it is almost 50-50. And I'm not advocating that that's a good thing either, but following this money is really important for the public to get your hands around.
And I'll just say that the one case where we saw that money come in was in the AG's race, where indeed they ended up coming up with an ad that was our version of the Willie Horton ad, which is simply was, you know, obviously that Bob Ferguson had helped some guy get off of death row and horrible things happened, or that's what most people remembered about it. The fact is that, you know, Bob Ferguson was a non-paid volunteer in his first year interning in a summer job. And the fact is that I believe this is one of those cases where the facts, when revealed by all of these news sources, actually resulted in people deciding, cut it out. We cannot be bought like this. I do think that was one of the reality checks this year, that you can get an ad out there that the public, particularly a very sophisticated, educated population like Washington, says, oh, come on, that's not right. And even though then Bob Ferguson can go on and do all different kinds of ads that nobody would look at in terms of facts, the fact is that the damage was done, and the damage was done by the doer, not by the respondent.
Question? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
Whoever has the mic. Yes.
Sorry. So why do you think there wasn't a big change in the National House of Representatives?
because we were praying to God we would get as good as we did. The fact is that you were right. When you started off, Dean, and talked a little bit about the fact that a year ago, we were all sitting there commencing to think about moving to BC. The fact is that it was looking pretty bleak in all corners, and I got to tell you that when the boys behaving badly started, our first reaction was, oh my gosh, could it possibly be that they could be this stupid again? The fact became clear after a while that we were not going to be as devastated as all of us had planned. And I have to tell you that as somebody who still, turn the camera off for a minute, someone who can still say that she's faking an awful lot of the technology she says she knows and she teaches, the fact is that I got to say I had no idea the technology was going to be that good from the top down. I had no idea that Democrats were going to be able to do this machine thing where our targeting actually reached door to door right here in Whatcom County. So it was that.
I think one word, Rod. The word is incumbent.
Yeah.
Incumbents won in Washington State. The only the two open seats right here in the first district, that went Democrat, and the other open seat went Democrat as well. But incumbents won everywhere in Washington. Basically, they all won by 60% or more. Whereas the new winners, Denny Heck down in Olympia and Del Benny up here, won by less than 60%. It tells you the same old thing that we have seen forever, is that if you're an incumbent, and unless you really, fall down drunk in the public square or something, you're going to get reelected because the lobby will pay for your campaign, and you're just simply going to run on local issues, and you'll probably win. It really takes a strong candidate to beat an incumbent, and they just weren't there.
Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering if you foresee any national effort to have a national. I was wondering if you foresee any national effort to have a national registration so that every person who is able and entitled to vote will be able to vote?
The problem with election reform is it's split between federal and state, and almost all of the rules that count are run by the states rather than the feds. Yeah, it'd be great if we could do a lot of these things on the national level. I mean, why should voters in one state have greater access to the polls than others, or why shouldn't the registration system be uniform? But check me if I'm wrong, guys. But I think they're almost all state rules rather than federal, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got to go. You have to go see the movie Lincoln, because actually a fabulous movie, but when you go see it, it's the battles they had as to what was going to be state responsibility and what was going to be federal responsibility. I should say that here in Washington State, of course, we have one of the best, and now we almost have unity in terms of how all of our counties are dealing with registration, as well as registration, voting, the voting process, and tallying votes, which is why we could get more information than we've ever gotten on election night.
A question over here.
I have a two-part question on that. The first part is, how many people in this room are 35 years old or younger? Raise your hand, please. And the corollary question is, what can be done to bring the young people more into the election system, because they're going to inherit the future?
I think they're already in. I mean, I really do think that they're in. How they get their data is completely opposite than perhaps how we get their data. That's exactly right. It's the phones, it's Twitter, it's hearing what their friends say on campus or in the high school hallways. The other thing, as a mom of a 17-year-old daughter, soon to be a registered voter end of February, but I do think both political parties, candidates, do a fairly good job in reaching into the schools and talking about the importance of registering to vote, paying attention to these issues. I am amazed, despite at least where we come from, economics and civics are both electorates. They're not required classes, which just makes my hair go more curly than what it already is. they do follow these issues in a very thoughtful way. And to, I think, Cathy's point, they're also very, very global minded. They do not think about just Washington State or just Seattle or just Issaquah or wherever. It's kind of refreshing.
I think we have time for one more.
I don't know. I don't remember which one of you said it, but somebody talked about the charter school initiative is being passed also. Mm-hmm. You've not commented on it, and that's something I'm very interested in. What do you think will happen because the charter school amendment has passed, since education funding is not very high in Washington right now?
Well, first of all, our superintendent of public instruction is going to take it to court. Second of all, we're going to argue in the legislature as to how we fund schools differently so that we make charter schools look like they're not necessary or important. The irony for me in terms of charter schools is that when we took a look at those folks who are 35 and under, there was a 2-to-1 support for charter schools. And so if the kids are getting that frustration, and as somebody who's sister and mother or teachers, the public school system, the fact is that I have to say that if the kids feel that strongly, you follow that direction. And what I believe here is that people believe that our education system, which should be the joy, and it should be as beautiful as our scenery here, that what people are saying is that how did we let this slip so far? And now we're reaching for changes that have to be able to do something. And so from that perspective, I have to say that it was everyone over the age of 55, particularly if you were in the 4-county area from here to Seattle, and by the way, Pierce County, if you were 55 or over, you were voting against charter schools, if you were good voters. In most of these cases, the same young people, what it is just the opposite happened. Young people hugely voted for this. And certainly Republican base voted for it. In addition, business base voted for it. Women were actually caught quite in the middle. Women were the best. Women 35 to 55 were the strongest group of people that were still voting against charter schools.
Thanks, Cathy. And thanks very much to the panel. I know we're all going to leave today smarter than we came in here. So.
Thank you again all for coming, and I wanted to let the panelists know that we have a gift of some scenery for Whatcom County so you can think of it and relax from the politics for a while. So thanks again to them, and thanks to Dean for moderating. I would like to say, just to be sure that everybody knows, we don't have a meeting in December as is usual, but in January we'll start a whole new series of programs. Thank you for coming and supporting us all through the year, and we hope to have another range of great programs next year. So thanks again. Enjoy the holidays.